Hello students, welcome back to the Writers Workshops. This Writers Workshop is really going to get into some of those specifics that I did not get into in the previous workshop about finding your sources for an academic paper. This Writers Workshop is going to now get into the actual using of your sources. You know, you have these articles, let's say your professor has required 5 sources for your paper. You have them, you've got them picked out, you've worked with them, you're ready to go. Now how do you get information out of there and into your paper and have everything cited for APA? So this Writers Workshop is going to get into some of those specifics. So the good news is for using your sources is you only have 2 choices. You're either going to directly quote it, meaning you're going to use quotation marks because you're going to take the words exactly out of the article and put it in your paper, or you're going to paraphrase it, which means you're going to put it in your own words. So you only have 2 choices. That keeps it rather simple. However, as I'm sure you know, there are lots of specifics that go with that. So first of all, direct quotations. How do I know when to use someone's words verbatim? Verbatim means word for word. I took it right out of here verbatim and I put it in my paper. How do I know when to use quotations? Well, first of all, if you're citing someone who is an expert in the field or an authority figure in the field, that's a good opportunity to cite to quote directly, because that person and his expertise, his words will add a lot of credibility to your ideas. If you read something and the way that it's worded is just really memorable and unique and really just hits the point you want to make and you couldn't have said it better yourself, that's a good time to directly quote. Okay, so kind of keep those guidelines in mind. I will tell you that students tend to use too many quotations in papers. You really want quotations to be selective, and that will ensure that they are actually effective. Okay. There are some ways that direct quotations can really drag down your paper. So you can really get into some pitfalls with direct quoting. First of all, like I said, just too many quotations. This just gets tedious for a reader. You know, if you're just reading quotation after quotation, you know, I always tell students that only about 20% of a paper that requires sources should be cited source material. The rest of the paper, so maybe 70 to 80%, should be the writer's own words and ideas. If you keep that 80-20 balance in mind, you will not have too many quotations. You do not want to have college papers that are just simply one quoted thing after another. Then you didn't write the paper. You just simply took a bunch of stuff out of the articles and put it in your paper and called it yours, but it's really not your thinking and your connecting. So you want to make that kind of 20% rule for using sources, kind of make that your rule of thumb. Relying on one source too often. Sometimes I'll read a student's paper and he will have the same source quoted or cited over and over again. What you want to show as a college writer is that you can use all your sources well. And that means having a variety of sources and kind of going back and forth among sources. Mix it up. You don't want to have that same person cited in your paper over and over again. And also just quoting too much. You know, there's something called padding, and padding is when you've just padded your paper with a lot of unnecessary quoted material, and that makes it look like you don't have much to say on your own as a writer. And you know, there's actually a rule for that, which we're going to talk about, which is that quotations fewer than 40 words should be embedded into the text of your paper. Longer quotations, more than 40 words or more, those should be blocked. I will tell you, I'm not even going to show you an example of a blocked quotation because papers, the vast majority of college papers are going to be shorter papers, and by shorter I'm going to say less than 10 pages, and most of them are going to be much less than 10 pages. You should not have blocked quotations in a paper that's that brief. So, you know, At some point in your college career, you may be assigned a very lengthy paper, more than 10 pages, and at that point, maybe you would want to have a couple of blocked quotations. But generally speaking, any quotation that you use should be fewer than 40 words. And if you, first of all, that's an APA rule, and second of all, it just makes it look like you're trying to fill up your paper with too many quotes, and a professor is not going to like that. So make sure that you're using them judiciously. When you cite a quotation in text, there are 3 things that APA tells us you must have in there. Okay, you've got to tell us who wrote it, the author's name, the year of publication, and a page number. Those 3 things must accompany any direct quotation in an APA paper. So we're going to be looking at some examples of that in just a minute. I find that a lot of students do what's called dropped quotations, and a dropped quotation is just that. You drop it into your paper, but you don't use your own words to set it up or to introduce it. You should not have a freestanding quotation just dropped into the middle of your paper. All quotations should be introduced and integrated into your paper. Here's a very basic one here at the bottom of the screen. Remember those 3 things. Dr. Ben Simons, 2013, recommended all couples should be required by law to attend premarital counseling. Notice, Ben Simons, red, there's my author. Year of publication, blue, page number because it's a direct quotation, in green. Guys, notice the period is after the parentheses, after the page number. Okay? Students put that period all over the place. I see that before the parentheses. I see it before the parentheses and after the parentheses. So remember, a period ends an entire sentence and the page number is part of that sentence. So that's what it should look like. And again, those 3 things have to be with any quotation according to APA. Now, there are different ways to set that up. You can put the author's name and the year in the middle of the quotation. So all couples, Dr. Ben Simons 2013 recommended, should be required by law to attend premarital counseling. So notice in this case, you've put it the author name and publication year in the middle. You can put it at the end, okay? So you can have your page number, your author, your year at the end, but the punctuation has to be right, your period needs to be at the end, and notice it's P period. Sometimes students will put page and they'll write it out. Sometimes they'll put PG, and sometimes they'll put capital P. It should be lowercase p with a period, space, page number. Okay? So that's how you set up a quotation correctly for APA. Now, embedded quotations, I really like these because you just take a few key words and you embed them into your writing. So look at this one right here. Robbins, 2012, suggested that the overuse of social media sites such as Facebook resulted in increased loneliness and feelings of isolation for many people. And there's my page number. So notice the only part of that that's a direct quotation is the actual, what you see in red there. So I took a few key words from Robbins and I still acknowledged him and the publication year and the page number, but I didn't use the full quote. I used just a few key words and I embedded it into my own writing. To tell you the truth, that's really the best way to use direct quotations because it just flows better. It seems more natural as a writer, and your own voice as a writer can shine through in that way. But again, notice the 3 things that are still in there. Author last name, year of publication, page number. I've hit all of those for correct citing. A lot of students are familiar with the ... but they're not quite sure why or how to use them. So I thought we'd talk just a minute here about using ellipses, and that's what we mean by those 3 spaced periods. Sometimes you will find something that you want to quote, but you won't need all of it. And I strongly encourage you to use ellipses to show that you've omitted some words. And what that allows you to do is to just use the part of the quotation that you actually really, really need. And you're not padding your paper unnecessarily with unnecessary words. So again, you'll see I've taken some words out in that first example. So Robin suggested that overuse of social media sites resulted in increased loneliness. I've taken some words out of the middle there, and I've done my 3 spaced periods to show that omission. I've still got my page number, author name, year. Again, at the end there, you can use the ellipses at the end to show that you've taken off something from the end of the sentence. You do not use ellipses at the beginning of a quotation. So do you notice, like before overuse, even though there were words that preceded that in the original source, I didn't put ... overuse, because you do not use ellipses at the beginning of a quotation. You just pick it up wherever you need it, and you use them in the middle or the end. So if you've forgotten about the correct use of those, hopefully that's a refresher, and they're very useful because they allow you to pare down long quotations, so you're using just the part that you really need. So the other way to use source material is to paraphrase it. And really APA prefers paraphrasing, and that's why I tell students, you know, direct quotes, they're fine, but you don't want to use direct quotations all the time, and you don't want to overuse them. You definitely want to show as a writer that you can move back and forth between well-selected quotations and paraphrasing. So when you paraphrase, you convert a source's words into the writer's own words. So you read something, and then you put it in your own words, okay? Now, it's not as easy as that. Nothing in writing ever is, right? But that's the general idea. Why I like paraphrases is that they allow a writer to put in his own words something that may be too scholarly sounding, or just doesn't sound like the writer's own natural voice, but you keep the point the same, and you can still use the information, but you can make it sound like you, which I think that's something that all writers want their papers to reflect, is your own natural voice as a writer. And sometimes the material that comes out of those academic sources, that doesn't sound like I would write, and that probably doesn't sound like what you would say. So this allows you to, you know, work the information in and use it and still give credit to the original author, but to make it sound more natural. There are some rules to paraphrasing. I always tell students, just take a sentence or two to paraphrase it and put it in your paper. Paraphrasing is hard work to do it well, and you don't want to take on a big paragraph and try to paraphrase it. Just pick a couple of sentences and work on those really well. The paraphrase should be approximately the same length as the original. So if you see a couple sentences in the source, that's approximately the same length that should be in your paper. The paraphrase meaning must stay the same as the original. Sometimes I will look at a student's paraphrase in a paper, and then I'll look at the article and I'll think, that's not what the author meant. So the student has changed the meaning of the source. That's a problem. You want to make sure that you're representing the source accurately when you paraphrase it. You can't take it and create something new out of it. It still needs to be the same point. I always tell students that paraphrases should be completely rewritten, and even the arrangement of the words should be different. Sometimes students think that they can just change like the to an or something like that and call it a paraphrase. That's not true. The entire thing needs to have a different sound and feel. The meaning has to stay the same, okay? And remember, paraphrases are not your ideas as a writer. You read that somewhere. You still have to give the in-text citation, and the only difference between direct quoting and paraphrasing is you don't do a page number for paraphrasing. You just do the author and the year. So here's just a real quickie example. Here, let's say the original said, writers who change only a few words or who include various phrases from the source in the paraphrase commit plagiarism. Now here's a paraphrase of that, and notice my citing too. Harris, 2013, warned that plagiarism can occur if a writer does not completely reword a source or if he repeats words from the source verbatim. So notice, same idea, approximately the same length, but it just has a different wording and feel to it, and it's approximately the same length, and I cited it. Okay, so that's just one sentence. And again, paraphrasing takes a lot more time than direct quoting because you really have to work with the language. So I always tell students, just take on a sentence or two at a time for paraphrasing. But don't forget to cite it because you did not come up with that idea. Here's another citing option. You can cite it at the end, like you see here, Harris, comma, 2013. Again, note the punctuation. Harris, comma, 2013, okay? Period at the end, all right? You can set it up like that. I wanted to take just a minute and talk about common knowledge. Common knowledge is information that most people know anyway. It is information that you could find in multiple sources or multiple articles, and it's typically general information. I will tell you that I often read and see in students' papers common knowledge cited. Well, one thing that is unfortunate about that is that of all the great information out there, a student cited something that most people knew anyway. You know, when you're choosing that 20%, that 20% of information in your paper that you really want to stand out as excellent academic information that's supporting your points as a writer, you want it to be really sharp. You want it to really shine. And if you are citing common knowledge, information that most people know anyway, you're kind of losing your opportunity to really use your sources well. So, you know, there's just information that people know. You don't have to cite it, and even if you see it in a source, people know it anyway. It doesn't have to be cited, okay? So don't waste your sources citing common knowledge. Here are some examples. Historical facts, like the dates of the Civil War. You know, even if you don't know off the top of your head the dates of the Civil War, it's pretty much in every history book, every reference book. It's something that every student learns in school, that type of thing. You don't need to cite that. General information that most people know anyway. Houston, Texas is hot. Well, tell me something new, right? Many children struggle in school. We know this. Teenagers can be rebellious. We know these things, okay? Even if you see that idea in a source, you don't want to cite it in a paper because that's just general information that people know anyway. And common sayings like, look before you leap, all right? That type of thing. You don't want to cite that, okay? Those are just common sayings. First of all, they shouldn't be in your paper anyway. Remember what we said about not using slang, but you definitely don't want to cite them. So one of my final words on this is just don't waste your citing opportunities on information that could be classified as common knowledge. Really choose information well. Look for those statistics. Look for those percentages. Look for those startling pieces of information that are really going to get your reader's attention. Look for those really sharp examples that are going to make a reader say, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. You know, that's what you want to pull out of your sources that will really add to your paper and to support your ideas. So don't cite common knowledge. That kind of takes away from that process. So the purpose of this writer's workshop was to remind you of best practices of how to cite APA format using quotations and paraphrases, the difference between the two, some tips on how to do each of those well, when you choose to direct quote, when you choose to paraphrase, and also that just general 80-20 rule I told you. Like a lot of times students are like, I don't know how much sources, my professor said I need 5 sources in my paper, but I don't know how much of that actually gets in my paper. Again, remember the 80-20 rule. About 20% of your paper should be research. The rest of it should just be your own ideas and your own connections that you're making as a writer. So hopefully this was a good review of direct quoting and paraphrasing, and I'll see you in the next workshop.